Of the many gruesome prison camps operated by the Khmer Rouge, one stands out above them all, due to its near 100% mortality rate for its prisoners. Security Prison 21 was the site of the countless crimes against humanity and the murders of an estimated 17,000 people. Those who did not die due to the harsh treatment or torture were taken to the infamous killing fields and murdered. A secret prison known only by the leaders of the Khmer Rouge, a select few of the Central Committee, and those who worked in the prison. It is today the site of a museum cataloguing the horrors of the Khmer Rouge. In today's video, we will explore what life was like for those unfortunate enough to end up in a truly hopeless place. Whilst we will have another video on the Khmer Rouge which explains their motivations, it is helpful to provide a brief summary of their goals. They sought to create a communist agrarian utopia where the population would work as forced farm labourers. The goal was to be self-reliant, no matter the cost. Those who did not fit into or worked against this vision were brutally murdered in prison camps and at the notorious killing fields. The building which housed S21 was initially a private school in a relatively affluent part of the capital, Phnom Penh. In April of 1975, the capital was captured by the Khmer Rouge forces. Work almost immediately began on transforming the school into a prison. Its 5 school buildings around the grass courtyard were transformed. Classrooms were crudely separated into single cells, no bigger than a shower cubicle. Some of the rooms were stripped bare in order to house many prisoners at once. Places of learning were turned into interrogation chambers. Razor wire and iron bars prevented escape. Whips and chains replaced school books and chalkboards. The type of prisoner who ended up at S21 varied greatly. To begin with, government officials and soldiers of the previous regime were rounded up and sent to be processed. As paranoia grew, even loyal members of the Khmer Rouge ended up spending their last days at S21. Being a member of the party was no protection, as the state looked to blame its own members for its own failings. The average citizen would find themselves a prisoner for the most banal of reasons: eating at an incorrect time, failing to meet a production quota, or suspected of being an agent for some foreign spy agency seeking to destroy all of Pol Pot's hard work. The last example may seem bizarre, but it highlights the paranoia that gripped Pol Pot's regime as it failed to achieve its targets for agricultural production. It was widely believed by the leaders of the Khmer Rouge that ordinary citizens were in fact agents of the CIA or KGB. This was deemed to be the only logical explanation, as no other possible reason could be considered for why their perfect state was failing. Someone needed to be blamed, and those who passed into S21 were made to give convoluted confessions of such espionage and sabotage. By mere suspicion alone, a prisoner would be deemed to be guilty. After all, the regime did not make mistakes. The role of the prison guards was to obtain a confession by any means necessary, and the process in obtaining the confessions was truly horrific. The day-to-day running of S21 was overseen by Brother Dyke and his coterie of 1,700 guards, record keepers, and torturers. These guards were very rarely older than 19, with an average age of only 15 to 18. These young men were part of the Khmer Rouge's revolutionary army that had been growing in the forests of the Vietnamese border. These child soldiers became child guards and enforced the party's will. Brother Dyke was the alias given to a man named Can Kak Lu, a former teacher and overseer of the prison. He was a meticulous individual and a bureaucrat who controlled the lives of thousands. It was his will that was enacted by his guards, often with express threat of death and torture for failure. For example, one prison guard found themselves in S21 for the crime of beating a prisoner to death before a suitable confession was extracted. He was in turn tortured and murdered by his former colleagues. If you had been found to be a suspect and ended up in S21, it was very likely that your family would be brought along too. Prisoners would be brought in by trucks, usually at night. Before entering, they would be blindfolded and made to walk up and down the steps to the amusement of the guards, making the prisoners fall over. The first thing they would see after their blindfold was removed would be Nem Ayen, the prison photographer. During his time at S21, he took thousands of photographs of the condemned, many of which still exist to this day and are on display in the museum. The prisoners then would be made aware of the 10 rules they must abide during their time at S21. These included answering questions immediately and in full, and not to cry out in pain when being whipped or electrocuted. The final rule was that if any of the rules were broken, the prisoner would receive 10 lashes or 5 electric shocks. The disorientated prisoners would be given a number. This began the meticulous record keeping, a false procedure to justify what would take place. The first interrogation would be more of an interview. The prisoner would be made to recount their entire life story from as far back as they could up until the point they arrived at S21. All of this would be recorded in notebooks that would form the basis of confessions for any crimes committed by the prisoner. The prisoner would then be taken to their cells, either a cubicle where they would be shackled by the ankles, or in a large room where many prisoners would be chained together. New prisoners would be greeted with the sight of emaciated prisoners, heavily scarred and beaten. In the new cells, the prisoner would await their turn. What we know about the daily routine of the prisoners of S21 comes from the former guards or the handful of survivors of S21. Of the 17,000 prisoners who passed through, only 7 adults are known to have survived. One of the survivors is a man named Chum May, who is still alive and to this day gives tours at the museum. The only reason he was not killed was due to his mechanical expertise. He would repair the typewriters used to record the countless pages of confessions, as well as the sewing machines used to repair the Khmer Rouge uniforms. This, however, did not stop the guards from torturing him for a confession. Chum May was kept at S21 from October of 1978 until January of 1979. After the initial photograph and interview, he was brought into a small room and shackled to 9 other people. Later, he would be kept in one of the small cubicle cells, no bigger than a shower cubicle. The cell was empty but for a metal ammunition crate and a plastic bottle for him to use as a toilet. Any spillage he would have to clean with his own tongue. The only food that he was given was a ladle's worth of rice gruel each day, just enough to keep him alive. He would supplement his diet with cockroaches and even a rat, risking severe punishment if he was caught. Every aspect of his life within the prison cell was controlled. He would need to ask for permission to move, to stand, or to sleep. Talking with other prisoners was strictly prohibited. To not ask permission for any action would invite a beating. Chum May recalls being beaten with bamboo sticks for the first 12 days and 12 nights, leaving him unable to lay on the bare tiled floor due to the swelling on his back. Interrogations took place, and the confessions were transcribed into multiple notebooks. He first confessed to wasting materials and damaging machines at his job of making clothes. This was all he could think of to say, but this was not enough. His guards would ask about his role with the CIA or KGB. At the time, Chum May had not even heard of these groups, let alone about what they did. Not being able to confess to crimes he could not even imagine, the torture increased. His toenails were ripped out with metal pincers. But the torture that caused the most damage was the electric shocks administered through his ears, leaving him deaf in one ear and partially blind in one eye. In an attempt to make the torture end, Chum May confessed to whatever the guards wanted to hear, but part of the deal for the confession to be accepted and the torture to end was to give the names of co-conspirators to his crimes. This was required for every prisoner that was processed by S21. The guards would not just accept one or two names of co-conspirators. Chum May was made to give the names of 70 of his friends, family and colleagues. He had not committed any crime, and nor had the people he had named. But such was the desperation created that countless prisoners did the exact same thing in a bid to make the torture stop. These names were then checked, and if it was thought that they posed a threat, the person would be brought into S21, thus starting the whole process again. The day's confessions were then compiled and reviewed by Brother Dyke. Any that were deemed to be too unbelievable or too fantastical were rejected, and the guards were told to start again. They were told to continue until they obtained something the Central Committee could accept. The confessions that were deemed believable would be sent to the Central Committee for review, who in turn would return the smash list. One thing that genocidal regimes all seem to have in common is euphemisms for murder. Smash was the chosen term for murder for the enemies of the Khmer Rouge. Trucks would arrive at night, and those on the smash list would be loaded into the back, shackled and blindfolded. Many of the prisoners were taken to Chong Ek, a nearby killing field. Him Hway was a guard at S21 responsible for transporting those on the smash lists to their graves. He would be responsible for ensuring the prisoners in the trucks matched the lists and that the right number had been gathered. The prisoners were then brought before pre-dug graves, made to kneel, and then hit in the back of the head with a club or metal pole. As the prisoners would lay in their graves, they would finish off with a slash to their throats. Him Hway recalls on occasion seeing Brother Dyke at the Chongek killing fields. Brother Dyke would test his commitment to the Khmer Rouge, insisting that he did not stay by the trucks and instead took part in the hitting of prisoners into their graves. S21 was liberated in 1979 by Vietnamese troops as they closed in on the Khmer Rouge. The prison was abandoned, leaving a handful of survivors and countless bodies and records, a monument to the horrors. Many of the leading members of the Khmer regime avoided justice for quite some time. It was only in 2007 that Brother Dyke faced charges for the murders he directed and tortures carried out on his orders. Chum May was a key witness and was able to tell his story to the world in the pursuit of some semblance of justice. Brother Dyke was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Whilst he claimed to be sorrowful for his role in the killings, he claimed it was the Khmer Rouge that was truly to blame and that he was simply caught up in the fear of the state. Some of those at the trial noted that he addressed his apology only to the judges and not to the hundreds of victims and the families who had lost loved ones that were watching the tribunal in the gallery. Brother Dyke died in September of 2020. Him Hway's story is now part of the Chong Ek Memorial. Whilst he regrets his role in the crimes at S21 and the killing fields, he claims he never intended to commit such acts and would not have done so if not ordered with a threat of death should he not comply. The horrors of S21 are difficult to comprehend. Those who committed the day-to-day torture and murder were young and under the thumb of a regime that had no problem in killing thousands of people in pursuit of its goals. Those in positions of power clearly held great sway over their young cadres of guards and soldiers. At first glance, there appears to be a lack of accountability for those who carried out the killings and tortures. Very few prosecutions have taken place for the crimes of the Khmer Rouge, unlike the effort to bring those who took part in other crimes against humanity. Perhaps this reluctance speaks to a level of understanding that many of those who worked in the S21 prison were in a sense victims as well. Whether this is of solace to those who met their end in the most unbearable ways imaginable, we cannot know. What we must never forget is the power of dehumanizing each other, and of submitting our humanity to those who would cast it aside so easily.